Emily dropped her phone, hands trembling, as the rescue worker's message flashed on screen. The saddle plate reads, "Property of Cartwright." You? Her childhood horse, gone for nearly 2 decades, was alive, starved, scarred, waiting. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The silence that followed Silver's absence wasn't empty. It was heavy, suffocating, like the stillness before a storm that never breaks. In Seattle, everything was gray. Not just the sky or the rain that seemed to slick the world in a constant sheen, but the walls of her bedroom, the cafeteria tables at her new school, the vacant tone in her father's voice. Emily tried to recreate routine, tried brushing her own hair like she used to brush Silver's mane, tried whispering to the shadows of her room as if they might hold secrets back, but nothing filled the absence. There was no soft nicker in the morning, no thud of hooves in the grass, just the distant drone of traffic and her father's too loud television at night. Each morning she passed through the halls like a ghost in sneakers, eyes down, backpack a shield slung too low over one shoulder. Teachers called on her less and less. Students didn't tease her. They simply didn't see her. At night she sat on her windowsill, watching the fog slide like a second skin across the glass, remembering how Silver used to turn her head when Emily called her name. The mare always knew, always came. Letters were never an option. She didn't know where Silver had gone, and when she once dared to ask her father again, weeks after the move, his response was clipped and final. "Let it go, Emily. It's just a horse." Just a horse. The words looped in her head like a curse, an erasure of everything that had mattered. That winter, she stopped drawing. She'd once filled sketchbooks with pictures of horses, realistic ones, wild ones, magical ones, galloping through impossible landscapes. But the graphite lost its life in her hand. Every time she tried, the shape of Silver's ears, the knowing depth of her eyes, the gentle slope of her shoulders, all of it slipped away, half-formed, never right. But memory has its own stubborn rhythm, its own rituals. She still remembered the way Silver's breath fogged in the cold, the feel of warm muscle beneath her thighs as they cantered toward the river bend, how Silver would tilt her head and look at her as if to say, "You're not broken, just quiet." And so Emily learned to survive without the mare, but she never stopped listening for the sound of hooves in her dreams. It took her nearly 10 minutes to type a reply, her fingers trembling too badly to hit the keys without error. Her mind, usually so practiced in calm under pressure, drawing blood from agitated dogs, calming fractured animals post-surgery, was now a cyclone. She barely noticed the world around her. The glow of her laptop screen seemed brighter than it was, the hum of her apartment louder, almost unbearable. When the rescue responded with more photos, close-ups of the mare's eyes, the familiar patterning on her foreleg, that white blaze like a comet caught mid-strike, Emily felt a kind of grief she hadn't known had a name, not the clean, sharp grief of loss. This was its second cousin, recognition after neglect. The realization that the part of herself she'd buried wasn't gone, just silenced, curled up somewhere waiting for breath. The rescue, a small nonprofit outside Lexington, offered little in the way of background. The mare had been seized in a neglect case, one of 19 animals found in a half-collapsed barn, no food, no fresh water, ankle-deep in their own waste. Her hooves had been overgrown, her ribs visible. Emily read the intake notes in clinical terms at first, defaulting to the language of her profession. Underweight, arthritic hocks, chronic laminitis. But then she saw the phrase behavior, alert and responsive, and something inside her cracked. Of course she was. Silver had always been like that. Even as a filly, she was the one who noticed butterflies and airplane shadows, who turned her ears toward your voice before your mouth even moved. It was almost midnight when Emily sat back in her desk chair, photos and vet reports scattered across her inbox, and stared at the wall. It had been 14 years. Could it really be Silver? There had been no microchip back then, no official papers beyond her grandfather's handwritten records, long since lost in a flooded basement. But that saddle nameplate, they'd said it was rusted, nearly unreadable. They'd sent a photo. She had to zoom in 3 times, tilt her screen to catch the light, but there it was, the ghosted outline of a name beneath the grime. E. Cartwright. She exhaled, a sound closer to a sob than a breath. The edges of her world tilted inward. But hope has its own weight, and what came next would test it. Because as the full intake file loaded, slowly, line by line, Emily saw something that turned her stomach. A single note, buried near the bottom. Transferred through multiple owners, previous condition, unsuitable for riding. Suspected chronic neglect. 14 years. 14 years. What had they done to her? She closed the laptop with shaking hands. For the first time since she was a child, Emily felt powerless again. Emily sat in the rental car for nearly an hour after leaving the rescue, unable to turn the key, unable to breathe deeply. Her body was stone, held in place by the weight of what she now knew. It wasn't just the shock of Silver's condition, though that alone was enough to splinter something in her chest. It was the story hidden beneath the surface. The trail of quiet cruelty, masked as care, passed from one indifferent hand to another. 5 owners, 5 chances to be safe, 5 failures. The image of the cramped shed haunted her. Lisa hadn't elaborated, but Emily's mind filled in the rest. The ammonia-thick air, the mold creeping up plywood walls, Silver's hooves curled from neglect, a water bucket tipped dry and left that way for days, and the breeding. God. Emily had to grip the steering wheel just to keep herself from screaming. Silver, her Silver, turned into a broodmare, her body reduced to function, her softness exploited. She felt a sharp pang of guilt she couldn't ignore. The story she'd told herself for years, that they'd sold Silver to a good family, that the mare was living out her days on some sunny pasture, wasn't just naive. It had been willful, a lie stitched carefully to cover the wound her father left behind when he sold the horse without her knowledge. She had swallowed that lie because it was easier than questioning it, because she hadn't wanted to reopen that door. Now the door had been kicked from its hinges, and Silver, despite it all, had trotted. Her legs should have buckled, her joints stiff from years of cold concrete and malnutrition, but instead, she had run, right into Emily's arms. That act was a kind of miracle, an echo of the horse she once knew, not just in movement, but in soul. Trust, unbroken, somehow still intact. How? How could Silver forgive what Emily could barely confront? Later, in the dim motel room, Emily sat cross-legged on the carpet, the smell of antiseptic and old coffee filtering through the vents. She stared at her phone. She could barely look at the pictures she'd taken, close-ups of Silver's sunken flanks, the scars near her hock, the way her hip bones jutted like shelves beneath thin skin. She should have come sooner. The thought pressed against her like a weight on her chest. She should have fought harder when her father sold the horse. She should have searched. She should have cared enough to not let time bury what mattered. But grief, she realized, isn't just sorrow. It's debt, and some debts don't forgive interest. So she sat, drowning in it, as the knowledge settled in her bones like winter. Silver had waited, and suffered, and waited again. Emily stood at the gate each morning before dawn, coffee cooling in her hand, as the fog lifted off the grass like breath. The pasture was modest, fenced with aging cedar posts, a single run-in shelter at the back, but it was clean, safe, and hers. Silver would lift her head from the hay at the sound of Emily's voice, ears flicking forward, nostrils flaring gently. Then, always, the same moment that stilled Emily's chest, the soft, deliberate trot across the field. Not fast, not flashy, just certain. Each step measured, her joints looser now, her coat fuller, her eyes alert. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living again. The adoption went through without issue. Lisa had smiled when handing Emily the final papers, like it had been a foregone conclusion all along. Still, Emily read every word, signed every line like a sacred pact. This time, there would be no unanswered questions, no back doors. No one else would ever have the right to decide for Silver again. The days blurred into a rhythm, the kind that reorders a person from the inside out. Emily balanced her shifts at the clinic with her new second life as a caretaker. She spent evenings brushing out Silver's coat, memorizing the contours of her body, learning where old injuries lay hidden beneath the skin. They walked the perimeter of the pasture together, slow at first, then with more pace, then finally with ease. Not as trainer and horse, not even as owner and animal, but something older, something elemental, companions bound by time and pain and return. It was during these quiet hours that Emily began to speak aloud, not for Silver's understanding, but for her own. She talked about her father, not just his failings, but the warmth that once lived beneath them, flickering and inconsistent. She confessed her guilt, her shame for not searching sooner, her aching fear that love had a shelf life. And she told Silver the things no one else would ever hear. How she used to dream of that summer they first rode together, bareback through fields when everything felt golden and endless. How she thought she'd buried that girl forever. But she hadn't. She was still here. The envelope had cracked something open. Seeing her father's name, John Cartwright, bold and undeniable, on that receipt had sliced through the last illusions. He hadn't lost Silver. He hadn't given her up with regret. He'd sold her, traded her for money, same as any other asset. That truth had hurt more than she expected, not because it shocked her, but because it didn't. And yet, Emily chose not to drown in that hurt. Instead, she built something with it. Silver was thriving. Her muscle tone was returning. Her eyes shone again. She greeted each day with the quiet dignity of a survivor who has nothing left to prove. Watching her, Emily learned to forgive, not the act, but the shadow it cast. She learned that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about choosing what to carry forward. And every morning, as the sun climbed the fence line and Silver nudged her shoulder with the gentle insistence of a friend who remembers everything and holds no grudge, Emily whispered the same words, soft and certain. "We're home now, girl. We're finally home."